everyone. Do I start my slides, or how does this work? Or somebody? Yes. Can we have a light a little bit darker? Lower? Oh, well. Thanks a lot. It's really great to see so many people here and so many people with this kind of a concern. It was great to hear Vigdis. Actually, we know each other from before, and she programmed one of my performances for children with diverse developmental profiles. So I'm an artist. I'm the one who took very seriously the task of what does it mean to make work from the scratch for everybody. My focus are children, because they are very often marginalized more than other groups in society, as neurotypical children even. So I took a responsibility to engage into academic research and to look deeply into what does it mean and what does it takes, and what kind of a form performing arts experience takes if we want to take into account all kinds of ways of existing, being, perceiving, engaging, and expressing. So I have a presentation here. I'm going to do a lot of reading, so be brave. Bear with me. Text might be a bit dense. I'm going to be reading quite quick, so I really hope the technology will stand to it. And I'm going to be, of course, also having problems with changing slides, as Vigdis. So my choreographic career started in 1997, and the work in the field of creating for young audiences started in 2008 with my first performance for babies and the smallest children. And then it became my sole focus from 2014. I completely ditched the adult audiences and decided to dedicate to the group which is and still was and still is marginalized, which is like smallest babies at the time. That work laid the artistic, conceptual, and ideological foundations for my subsequent work for children of diverse developmental profiles. My practice, which evolved further through my academic research project towards sensuous ecologies, conducted at Stockholm University of Arts and supported by Swedish Research Council, is something that I'm going to present here. So this research was guided by a series of inquiries aimed at challenging normative formats in performing arts and fostering inclusivity through artistic experience. My research was dedicated, as I said, to finding performative formats and performative practices that are deeply and truly respectful of audience with most various ways of being, perceiving, and behaving. All facets of the practice that emerged from this multifaceted research were informed by the complex heterogeneity of this audience. They constitute a framework that enables and fosters a sensuous, interrelational ecology of performance and plays a substantial role in shaping the emergent and phenomenal nature of performance event. So they form a field of practice which I named sensuous performative ecologies. Ecological ethos is central to my motivation. It's a source of my curiosity and the greatest challenge to what I want my performances to embody. I will introduce a constellation of my practice constituents which are tightly codependent one on another, intrinsically enabling the sensuous ecology of the event. But first, some grounding is needed. As performance events constitutes a relational encounter between artist and audience, the very nature of this encounter depends on who the audience is and on the desires, values, and assumptions embedded in artistic proposal. When both critically acknowledged, they significantly determine the conditions which enable the interrelational ecology of event to emerge. Children, as the primary audience in the field of performing arts for young audience, are often regarded as a homogeneous group. You are also as well regarded here a bit as a homogeneous group. You are expected to sit in a certain way and behave in a certain way. So let's acknowledge that. So those children as well are generally expected to process the experience within the same amount of time, access it in a uniform way, behave in universal normative manner and conform to established theatrical conventions. My practice fundamentally challenges these restrictive concepts and conventions, embracing and celebrating the heterogeneity of my audiences across all of its facets. Ideological issues are widely at stake in theater for children, especially in regard to power relations between child and adult. Therefore, central to my practice is a clear and critically engaged stance on the political and ideological perspectives framing the child and childhood. My practice is aligned with Karen Moore's theoretical critique of traditional deficit-based models that frame children as incomplete or inferior. Moore's highlights how the construct of the normal knowing subject as a mature male adult reinforces institutionalized power imbalances between adults and children. Children are frequently dismissed based on assumption on their developmental status, deemed innocent, fragile, irrational, and immature. These preconceptions prevent them from being recognized as legitimate source of knowledge, denying children ethical, epistemic, and ontological recognition. As Murray argues, such ageist prejudices are directly related to the nature-culture dichotomy, which separates the child from the adult epistemically and positions the child as ontologically colonialized other. In alignment with Moore's work, my practice challenges these hierarchical and binary framings of childhood and considers children and adults to be inherently entangled, existing in a constant relation, influencing and co-constituting one another within a symbiotic system. By recognizing children as active participants who engage with the world in diverse, embodied, and sensory ways, I decline deficit-based notions of childhood, aligning all the facets of my practice and my work with dismantling hierarchical and binary distinctions, honoring the agency and individuality of my primary audience. While diverse, this heterogeneous group shares certain characteristics in concern of the diverse ways of perceiving and behaving, encompassing immediacy, spontaneity, curiosity, and various forms of engagement. Hence, the central concern in this regard and crucial to my practice and in making performances for this audience is a notion of attention. Inquiry into attentional modalities of infants and neurodivergent individuals calls into the question the adequacy of the attention versus distraction binary in the context of audience engagement, characteristic of conventional theater approaches. Children in general perceive and experience the world drastically different than adults. Babies and toddlers, as Gopnik and Welsh state, have a lantern consciousness, and they have a perspective-free perception, the mode of attention reflecting a profound connection to the world where the sense of self is dissolved and one becomes fully immersed in the environment. A similarly expansive mode of attention is also evident in many neurodivergent modalities. In particular, autistic children, where autistic perception is often characterized by heightened perceptual capacity and unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment, as well as hypo or hyperactivity to sensory input. These diverse ways of being in the world are constitutional for my practice. They call for performance spaces and performance practice in which such diverse modalities and attentional dynamics can thrive rather than being suppressed and disciplined. The performance space that respects such a heterogeneous audience resists hierarchical framing of childhood and invokes ecological sensibility. And such space must be immersive, it must be decentralized, and it must be liminal, as in playful. How are we doing so far? Fundamental for my practice and for this audience group, it turns out to be, is immersion as a form and modality of aesthetic experience. Immersion challenges conventional theater paradigms, like this one, by dissolving separation between performers and the audiences, enabling audience to freely move in the space and engage with the environment on their own terms. Babies' nature is phenomenological. They experience and learn by moving and exploring environment with their bodies and through their bodies, and they have endless curiosity, as many children do. Children with autism very often need to run around in the space, finding their ways of engagement, claiming this engagement as well as a way of being. As well as children who use wheelchair, they need to be able to access the artistic work without physical obstacles and restrictions and without judgment on eligible and illegible behavior. Therefore, immersion welcomes everyone. Within such a space of inclusion, the audience actively shapes the performance by co-composing alongside the performers, inspiring each other with their choices and actions, generating a collective composition in which uninhibited modes of engagement can thrive. Hence, immersion enables decentralized, multi-perspectival environment where, moreover, all the artistic elements at the play are in total absence of hierarchical structures, which means dancers are not more important than a scenography, even than the floor, or the sound, or the light, or the sense. It means that audience is one who decides with what they will engage in their own terms, in their amount of time. The active decision-making and the sensual involvement inherent in immersive environments can be transformative on individual level, both psychologically and ideologically. Shared actions within such an environment foreground the notion of emancipated spectator and agency and the idea of activated spectatorship as a politicized aesthetic practice. Moreover, multi-perspectivism, which is equated by a liberal emancipatory politics, replaces single-point perspective, which we have here, and the psychological rigidity related to patriarchal ideology, stating that there is no right or wrong way of looking at the world or a privileged position. Crucially, this approach perceives the audience not as an individual who experiences the art in transcendent or existential isolation, but as a part of a collective and a community. Hence, immersive environments enable dynamic interplay within heterogeneous audience, where children often engage with perspectives unshaped by conventional theatrical references. Furthermore, the communal nature of artistic experience in immersive formats can alter the perception of art's role in life, which is a political statement within my work, underscoring the potential of art to dissolve hierarchical and preconceived frameworks of spectatorship, foster inclusion, and collective meaning-making. Infants and children, both neurotypical and with diverse developmental profiles, perceive the world primarily through immediate sensory and affective experiences, grounded in embodied moment-to-moment interactions with their surrounding. So we do as adults, but we are very much conditioned by culture, inhibition, and whatnot. Within an immersive, sensory-rich environment, the interplay of sensations occurs involuntarily, bypassing deliberate cognitive operations and foregrounding nuanced, intuitive responses to sensory stimuli. Through melding of sensual perspectives, embodied responses replace cognitive understanding, and cognitive ability is no longer determined on what an audience gains. Intersensoriality, a multidirectional interplay of the senses, directly implicates also sensory ideologies and hierarchies. My commitment to de-hierarchizing adult-child relations, as well as compositional elements within artistic work, also necessitates a critical engagement with sensory hierarchies that reflect and reinforce gendered, colonial, and ableist logic. Hence, asserting a non-hierarchical approach to sensory perception within an immersive space renders the performing space experience fully inclusive. When I talk about the primary senses and priority of the senses and hierarchies, here you are looking at me to see me, and you hear language to understand me. And this reinforces cognitive intellectual knowledge, placing the value only on understanding and meaning. There are other kinds of knowledges, such as embodied knowledge, that have as much value as intellectual and cognitive processing. And they've been disregarded in all kinds of ways, and they are extremely powerful way of connecting and communicating. And this is what art can bring into the room when we are inviting everybody to have an artistic experience. Therefore, if we take away the language as our primary mode of communication, language becomes primary at a certain point in our lives, but was never actually primary. And I will explain why. Movement has a primacy in the communication. It's immediately felt and experienced. It demonstrates the power and primacy over language and intellectual constructs in capturing and communicating the ineffable qualia of life. It enables a level of appreciation that challenges linguistic expression, as the body generates a wholly sensate form of expression. Movement is fundamental to emotional and social interactions. When we perceive movement, we first and foremost perceive its dynamic quality, which is inherently kinetic. Kinesthesia, as a sensory modality, is concerned with the subtle bodily perceptions, plays a central role in integrating senses, forming an ongoing duet between the perceiver and the surroundings. Furthermore, it possesses pre-verbal and precognitive qualities. Kinesthesia is central to affective and empathic attunement. And as such, it's crucial for intersubjectivity and intercorporeality if we talk communication. Kinesthetic affect therefore enables a relational process that emerges through encounters with movement and moving with others, from the macro to the micro intercorporeal exchange between the performer and the spectator. I'll talk a little bit about affect, because affect is something that we need to know about and we need to trust when it comes to communication, and it's deeply ingrained actually in every artistic experience. Affect is the feel of the flow, of vitality of what happens, the way it feels and the sense of how it goes. Affective transmission of dynamic forms is experienced through subjectivity, is experienced subjectively as forces in movement. It concerns the how of the manner, not the style, not the why and what. This vitality dynamics, or vitality force, as introduced by Daniel and Stern, can be experienced prior or independent of significant cognitive processing. And they are not specific to any particular emotion, and they're not limited to any sensory modality. Meaning, through affective transmission and affective experience, everybody perceives and has an experience of art. It doesn't have to contain language or any meaning or any understanding. These dynamics that we're talking about when we're talking about affect and movement are fundamental to subjective experience of being in a present moment. Crucially, these dynamics of experience are manifested in, as I said, all art forms. They are in the movement, in the music, even paintings, and can be felt and perceived in any sensory modality. The synesthesis of movement, dynamic forms, presentness, and affective experience, and intersubjective play have an essential role in making an exclusive artistic experience. They can be trusted as artistic means in reaching each individual. All these words and all this much about what happens very often when people are confronted with making work for audiences which might not be able to access the experience in a cognitive way as able-bodied, able-minded person. Then everybody gets paralyzed and they don't know what to do, because we trust language so much. We use language all the time that we even forgot that there are other forms of communication, right? Society doesn't help, ideologies don't help. And that's why I'm talking about the means that can be trusted and have to be used more often in artistic experiences, in particular also for this audience. So the next essential issue to address is the correlation between experience and the time. In the constitution of experience, temporality is as important as spatiality, and time is indispensable for sensory processing. Hence, my practice foregrounds the agency of time in performance event, enabling it as a critical experiential parameter and constituent. It challenges the conventional format of 30-40 minutes for children in performing arts context, as well neurotypical or neurodiverse children, which has long been established as a standard not only for, as I said, this specific audience group, but also audience in general. Such formats often impose highly controlled environment, reinforcing hierarchical power dynamics inherent in traditional theater, expecting audiences to behave in a disciplined, uniform manner. This framing disregards individual processing time, children's innate curiosity and their need for direct embodied experiences, thereby constraining their individual modes of engagements and exploration. Furthermore, the conventional formats, rooted in hierarchical, outdated, or insufficiently informed assumptions about attention, or simply deeming it irrelevant, seem to fail to acknowledge the causal relationship between restrictive theater settings and the modalities of attention. This lack of understanding or concern has led to the misconception that the audience lacks the capacity for sustained attention in performing arts experiences. The expected modes of attending and attentions were framed through an adult normative perspective. Therefore, the time deemed as the right amount for processing was assumed to be the same for every individual. On the other hand, within durational performance format, which in my case takes 3 to 4 hours, each individual has an opportunity to access and enjoy the experience on their own terms, arriving at the personally convenient time, engaging at their own pace, remaining as long as desired, and freely exiting and re-entering the space. Hence, durational format proved to be essential for this audience. So when I say 4 hours of the performance, doesn't mean that anyone is obliged to attend the 4 hours. It exactly takes away the pressure of being late. Coming out in a social public environment with a child with autism might be a really very demanding, and it is very demanding actions. For kindergartens or special schools to take kids to the venues puts a lot of pressure on them, exposing them to the rules and functionalities of the society that are, as we know, not at all on their own terms. Then you end up having an audience arriving at 11 because performance starts at 11, and they might not want to get in immediately. They might need time to take for themselves, to arrive, to be there and enter without being forced or being judged because they are not going to get there on time. So this means if they arrive half an hour later, there is something going on. If they need to leave the space during the performance, there is a space for kind of acclimatization, like in-between zone, where they can attune, have the sensory attunement, get fit, go back to the space without missing anything. So when I say durational, I say you have time for yourself to find your way in, to find your way during the performance, to find your way out whenever you're ready. Probably there's now all this written that I'm just going to repeat. So, as you understand, such format really acknowledges the diversity and diverse ways of engaging with an experience. It fosters spontaneity and the free will within a judgment-free setting, empowering the audience and shifting also adults' perception of their children. In this multifaceted unfolding of experience, the how-ness of time becomes paramount. Or, like Erin Manning says, are we on the wrong slide? No. As Erin says, the practice is woven into time, letting time unfold as it actively composes an emergent ecology. Okay, I'm also behind the time here. Implementation of immersion as a modality that intentionally blurs the boundaries between public and private behaviors and highlights the social aspect of artistic experience aligns with the notion of performance both as a static and event-based phenomenon, in which aesthetic, social, and political aspects are, as we can see, all intricately interlinked. Therefore, central to my approach to making performance for this audience is the notion of performance as a relational practice where performers, audience, and environment co-generate the event. And with this dynamic interplay, the work transcends individual expression and becomes shared participatory experience. Such dynamic environment, so I'm going to be freestyling now a little bit because we're running out of time. Such kind of a performance is really needs to be reconsidered in a sense of their structure, their dramaturgy, and the way artistic work is conceived. They really necessitate a certain kind of what is here called structural vitality, meaning that the approach to the dramaturgy and the choreography and the performative actions has to have a certain amount of flexibility and needs a large amount of strategies how to work with the environment that I called ecological performance ethos, and be able and make performers as well as artists be able to respond to the audience in the real-time experience. There might be real-time adjustments, there might be negotiating and changes made at the spot, while there is a structure that strongly supports the whole artistic format. So, another aspect of making this work extremely inclusive and welcoming is working with the scenography as well as a dynamic form. So objects in the space, they propose multi-layered sensory experiences which engage audiences in a variety of ways. The durational format, in combination with immersion, enables audience to experience and make sensory experiences on their own terms. It might be that the child engages with an object in one way at the beginning of the show, 10 hours, but 10 or 15 minutes later in another way through collaborative play, which enables them to develop their own imagination within what is the artistic proposal in the room. As well, having a scenography so accessible and all around the space as well decentralized, as we said, the role of the performer. It also, such way of having a scenography in a room initiates a collaborative play between children and enables engagement with sensory objects that, how do you say, they can sometimes surpass the ideas that I might have on my mind and I might have as a proposal for them in the room. So their children are choreographing their own flow experience and create micro-dramaturgies out of the proposal that's been placed in the room. Placing the primary focus on the sensory ecology of event perceived as a space of encounter and sharing and exploration, as well as integrity, uncertainty, and vulnerability, necessitates an approach to performative and movement practice that also aligns with such events' ethos. It requires practice that underlines that no one is at service to another, yet everyone and everything is considered. The practice values both engagement and disengagement and welcomes equally the frailty and strength of everyone involved. Furthermore, it calls for the practice that profoundly supports and empowers both dancers and the audience by challenging conventional performers' role and conventional theatrical settings. I'm at 28 minutes. Am I allowed to continue another 5? Can we afford that? Yes. So, actually, I am pretty much at the end. So my research demonstrates, basically, that dismantling hierarchy and the binary directions, the distinctions, and declining the deficit-based notion of childhood and personhood are fundamental in fostering equitable relationships that honor the agency of children, acknowledging their philosophical depths. Together, all these elements that I have presented form the foundation of the practice that challenge normative demands, honors heterogeneity, and fosters a transformative, inclusive ecology of performance. They are essential for creating performing arts events where diverse bodies and perceptions can thrive, where the ineffable qualities of human experience are celebrated, and where art becomes a site of radical freedom and shared humanity. Well, yeah, this is 29 minutes now with one little thing, one slide skipped. Thank you very much for listening.
Dalija, thank you so much for this deep and human perspective, and we have a few questions for you, okay?
Yes.
Okay, are you ready? So there are questions from our audience. So have you experienced that your performances heal or on the contrary hurt the audience?
Yes, my practice doesn't have a therapeutic intentions, but it's happened all the time that parents or caretakers come to us and report the children did something for the first time, either established a physical contact or made a verbal communication or engaged in a movement and in physical actions that they were not supposed to be able to do. And that's what happens during such an exposure, free exposure to the sensory stimulation. No one ever got hurt.
Yeah. Then is another very interesting question. Do you use scent as a tool in your performance?
Yes, I do. And scent is also very powerful and very strong means of bringing in experience and taking you out of the space where you are actually at the moment, because it operates on completely the fastest subconscious level of assessment.
So thank you so much, and we see you later, of course.